violence in media has been around since before media even existed. Almost every civilization in human history has enjoyed watching violence. Just look at the Romans, they did stuff other than watch dudes fight in that Colosseum, but that was definitely a big part of that place's appeal. But I'm not here to talk about ancient violence. I'm here to discuss how violence in modern day media like TV and movies affects the modern person. Violence isn't for everyone, and that's totally understandable. In fact, maybe consuming violent media shouldn't be for anyone. According to an article by Craig A. Anderson and many other contributors, the vast majority of laboratory-based experimental studies have revealed that violent media exposure causes increased aggressive thoughts, angry feelings, physiologic arousal, hostile appraisals, aggressive behavior, and desensitization to violence, and decreases the prosocial behavior, e.g. helping others, and empathy. Violent media seems to be nothing but negative according to this report. This isn't a one-off case either. Brad J. Bushman and L. Raoul Huesman, I believe that's pronounced, conducted a study on how a variety of different violent media affected children and adults. They found very similar results to Anderson. They discovered that the short-term effects of violent media were greater for adults than for children, whereas the long-term effects were greater for children than for adults. These effects were the same aggressive behaviors that Anderson cited in his research. It's especially disconcerting that children were negatively impacted long-term. There's even more reason to be worried about the negative effects violent media can have on a person, according to a research study by Richard B. Felsen. Felsen found that exposure to television violence probably does have a small effect on violent behavior for some viewers, possibly because the media directs viewers' attention to novel forms of violent behavior that they would not otherwise consider. His article even discusses how those predisposed to real-world violence can be further influenced by violent media. Like I said earlier, violence isn't for everyone, and that's okay. In fact, it's more than okay. It's one of the things I enjoy most about living in a country that values personal freedoms. If you don't personally enjoy violent media, no one can force you to consume it. However, that also means that no one can unreasonably stop you from consuming it either. What I mean by that is media shouldn't be overly regulated unless it is perpetuating harmful suggestions to the masses or contributing to widespread societal unrest. Bryant Furlow cites Victor Strasberger as saying, "Exposure to violence in any media is an established risk factor for aggression in children and adolescents, but only one of many. There will never be a study linking mass murder to violent video games. Mass murders are sufficiently rare that it would take a study of millions of people. Frankly, there just aren't enough heinous acts perpetuated by people working independently to cite violent media as a reasonable contributing factor. Millions consume violent media who aren't violent individuals. Yes, children do consume violent media and may even be influenced by it. It's the nature of being a child, though, being influenced. It's the responsibility of the adults in their lives to guide them into properly interpreting the media they consume." I cited Richard B. Felsen earlier, but I did it a bit misleadingly. Felsen's conclusion was that violent media couldn't be held responsible for meaningfully damaging a person. The full quote reads as follows: "The literature on the effect of exposure to media violence, including exposure to violent pornography, on aggressive behavior is critically reviewed. Evidence and theoretical arguments regarding short-term and long-term effects are discussed. 3 points are emphasized. 1. Exposure to violence in laboratory and field experiments is as likely to affect non-aggressive antisocial behavior as it does aggressive behavior. The pattern is consistent with a sponsor effect rather than a modeling effect. An experimenter who shows violent films creates a permissive atmosphere. 2. The message that is learned from the media about when it is legitimate to use violence is not much different from the message learned from other sources, with the exception that illegitimate violence is more likely to be punished in media presentations. 3. The fact that violent criminals tend to be versatile, they commit nonviolent crimes as well, is inconsistent with explanations that emphasize pro-violent socialization from the media or other sources. I conclude that exposure to television violence probably does have a small effect on violent behavior for some viewers, possibly because the media directs viewers' attentions to novel forms of violent behavior that they would not otherwise consider." Personally, I hate the idea of holding media responsible for the actions of people. Violence has existed long before entertainment was even a luxury humans could afford. I agree with director Quentin Tarantino, who said this when asked about the violent present in his films. "This is a movie. The bottom line is I'm not responsible for what some person does after they see a movie. I have one responsibility. My responsibility is to make characters and to be as true to them as I possibly can." I think this quote perfectly illustrates why violence in media is important and cannot be removed for the sake of an easy scapegoat. Fiction is fiction. Sometimes it's a cautionary tale and other times it's just plain fun. Violence is scary and often pretty grotesque and shouldn't be shown to those who don't want to see it. No one should be forced to consume something they are repulsed by. I believe the rating system in place is perfect. On Spectrum.net, there's a great description of how media is rated for different audiences, with detailed information on what warrants that rating. In conclusion, violent media is not responsible for violent actions in real life, and our current system of regulating that media doesn't need to be changed.